Let's talk about Edward's family first. I think we should start there. I think that's a good place to start. Ed's mother and father were Augusta and George. And Augusta would be described as a thick-set, buxom woman. She was very intimidating. Like, she had a very stern face. Augusta had been brought up to obey strict code of conduct, which her father had not hesitated to reinforce with regular beatings, and was raised in an extremely strict household with very hardcore religious beliefs. George, Ed's soon-to-be father, he was described as a strong, straight man with a reserved, even dignified manner. He was an orphan at a young age, sadly. His family had died in, I think I read, the Mississippi River. Like, I guess there was a flooding and they drowned. Didn't have a stable home. George worked many jobs. He worked on a railroad, carpenter, insurance salesman. It was rumored that he couldn't keep a job because he loved to drink. He liked alcohol and he was always getting drunk. He would spend all of his money on alcohol. So how Augusta, Ed's mom, and George got together is, no, I don't think anybody really knows. But they somehow got together. Said to be that Augusta liked George because he was a pushover. And George liked Augusta because, I don't know. People would say that Augusta was verbally abusive to him, calling him worthless, good for nothing, lazy dog. And she would do it in public too. George would go to a local tavern after work and he would get pretty drunk. And when he would go back home, he would beat Augusta because that was like the only way he would get any type of courage to stand up to her. When he would beat Augusta, it would lead to Augusta on her hands and knees praying to God to please kill her husband. It wasn't a good situation. But Augusta did crave the need for children and for family as well. So in January of 1902, the firstborn came. His name was Henry. 1906, Edward was born. And they lived in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So then in 1915, Augusta, she forced her husband to leave the sinkhole of filth, which was La Crosse, and moved to what she believed to be a more righteous location, which was on a 155-acre farm in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. She kept her two sons on the farm and away from anything considered dangerous or sinful. She kept her boys away from those sinful, whorish women. That's what she said. She was afraid of whores. Or no. She highly disliked whores. She just thought every woman besides her, I guess, was a whore. And she took full advantage of this farm that they lived on because they were in complete isolation. So she just like really locked up the kids. She just would make them do chores around the farm. And then they could go to school, that was it. And then they had to come straight home, do their chores. Augusta was extremely religious, if you haven't caught on. She preached to her boys about the immorality of the world and her belief that all women, except herself, were naturally prostitutes and instruments of the devil. So Edward was described as being shy. His classmates, teachers would say that he had very strange mannerisms. When I first read these mannerisms, I was like, is that strange though? You see, I guess Edward would just like bust out laughing randomly. And Edward would say that he was laughing at his own inside jokes that he was saying in his head. And that was odd. Is that weird? I thought that was normal. Anyways, I just had to say that I am hilarious and I make myself laugh all the time. But I'm not a killer, so I guess that's good. Uh-oh. Edward did not have many friends. Actually, he really didn't have any friends at all, poor kid. And when he did make friends, his mom, Augusta, was heavily against that because they were going to allow sin into his life. She did not want him to have friends. So she completely went off on him if he even mentioned to talking to anybody else. Damn it, I got too much powder. Now, because Edward, Henry, Augusta, and George, well, I don't know where George was at. He apparently was always working or drunk. That's really all you hear about. Augusta and Ed, they were very, very close. They were like inseparable. Edward would say that his mom was like his first love, his best friend. He was obsessed with his mom. Then comes April 1st, 1940. Ed's father, George, dies. He dies of heart failure. They think it had to do with him drinking. So Henry and Ed. They both had to pick up some odd jobs around the town to help cover living expenses. And then Henry, the brother, he began dating a divorced single mother of 2, and they were planning on moving in together. Henry was concerned for Edward. He seemed very attached to his mom. And like Henry was moving on with his life, he was getting out, he was going to get married to this new girl. Edward was just kind of stuck at home, obsessed with his mom. He needed to get out there, meet some ladies, start his own life. So Henry kind of expressed this to Edward, and then he also spoke pretty poorly about Augusta to Edward, and this upset Edward. So then May 16th, 1944, Henry and Ed, they were out working on the farm, and they were burning away marsh vegetation on the property. Reportedly, the fire got out of control. Fire department came out, put the fire out, but then Edward said that his brother was missing. Like, where's Henry? I don't know where he's at. A search party was put together looking for Henry, and then eventually they found his body lying face down. Apparently he had been dead for some time, Henry. It appeared that the cause of death was heart failure since he had not been burned. It was later reported that Henry had bruises on his head, which was weird. But okay. Police dismissed the possibility of foul play. Coroner later officially listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. Some would suspect that Ed killed his brother, but this would just be all speculation. No one really has proof of that. But knowing what we're gonna know, he probably killed his brother. Yeah. Edward seemed to be happy. He finally had his mother all to himself. Although a year later, Augusta had a stroke and was confined to her bed. Ed would tend to her day and night, and she would still verbally abuse him. She was very mean to him. She would call him a weakling and a failure, and that he would never be able to survive without her. Anyway, so it turns out Augusta died. Sorry. She died December 1945. She had a stroke. So this poor family is just not doing too well, right? So Edward was 39 when this happened, right? And he was devastated by the loss of his mother. He was left alone to really fend for himself. He's been given no life skills. Well, besides working small odd jobs, but no social skills. Yeah. So doesn't seem like it's going to be good. But this is when things just went downhill. Now, the home that they lived in was huge. It was a pretty good sized home. So Edward had it all to himself. So he ended up boarding up all the rooms to the house, and he kept his mom's room in perfect condition, like she never left. I mean, that was probably because it was an effort to repress the fact that she had died. The rest of the house was completely neglected. I mean, there was trash piled everywhere inside this home. He had piles of household items, furniture, mounds of dust collecting on all of the items inside of the home. He mainly hung out in the kitchen area, and it was just trash and garbage everywhere. It looked like what we know now as someone who is a hoarder. For some time, no one seemed to really even notice Ed. Poor guy. He was a loner. He rarely ventured off the farm. You would only see him in town when he was running errands or stopped for an occasional beer at Mary Hogan's Tavern. And then, of course, once everything went down, that's when people started to second guess on maybe some conversations they had with Ed. Maybe they should have paid more attention to the signs. Of course, it's hard because sometimes people are just odd, and that's who they are, and that's okay, and they're not doing anything shady. But then there are people who are odd, like Edward, and they're up to no good. How do you tell the difference? I don't know. After everything comes out about Edward, which we'll get into, that's when people are starting to realize, you know what? He made some weird comments a lot of the time. Ed's jokes, they were always weird. Mary Hogan, she's the tavern owner that everyone would go have a beer at or whatever. She went missing one day, and the only thing that was left behind of Mary was a pool of blood, but no one ever saw Mary again. But Ed would joke saying that she was staying overnight at his house. He would say it in a joking manner, but in their mind they would think that was a tasteless joke. People in the town would think, oh, old Ed wouldn't hurt anybody. So here's what happened. Bernice Warden disappeared. Bernice Warden, she disappeared November 16th, 1957. Late that afternoon, Frank Warden returned to town from a day of deer hunting and stopped by the hardware store where Bernice worked. Bernice was his mom, and he was just stopping by to check on her. She's 58 years old. She was a widow. He noticed that Bernice wasn't there. And it was weird because she had left the door unlocked and she left the back door open. So then Frank kind of looks around the hardware store, and then he sees by the register there's a trail of blood. Like, I guess it's just blood is on the floor and it's kind of like leading outwards or like smudged towards the exit, and this worries Frank. Frank looks at like the register area and he finds a receipt, and it was a receipt for a half gallon of antifreeze, and it had been made out to Ed. Ed. So Frank is thinking, suspicious. Not even suspicious. That's like a full red flag. Ed knows something.